And we are live. Good evening, everyone. It is, I'm going to double check this. It is February 15th, 2023, and it is currently 62 degrees outside. Welcome to the winter that never was, apparently, as we are dealing with a very mild weather pattern. With temperatures, they just updated. We have fallen a full 2 degrees down to 60 degrees in central New Jersey. It's in the mid to upper 50s around the Delaware River Valley. Meanwhile, if you're on Long Island, your temperatures are in the mid to upper 40s, lower 50s on the east end of Long Island. You could thank the Atlantic Ocean for that. Where the temperature influences are more like what you would see in the spring and summer, where cooler conditions are in place where you're closest to the water. Meanwhile, up towards the Poconos and the Catskills, we are in the 50s and 60s. Not exactly the best weather for ski conditions. And there's been a lot of talk about major stratospheric warming events, and this is, once again, as I discussed last week, a great example of how, yes, you can have almost everything come together the way you'd want it. Tropical forcing, moving into phase 7, 8, and 1, and major stratospheric warming taking place. But a couple of features are off by just a little bit, and you end up with this very mild weather pattern. I do have some good news, though, for you snow lovers out there, because there were some people who are saying, like, oh my God, we'll never have winter again. And El Nino is coming, a weak one at that. And it's coming for most likely next fall and the winter after that. So yeah, there is some hope. Years like this do happen. But sooner or later, we get a ton of snow, and not many people are happy, except perhaps for you guys out there who look forward to these winter storms. Some of you may not have to shovel them. Some of you actually make money on removing the snowfall. But this year is not the year for that. When we take a look at the observations, again, we already went through the surface observations, which are just... We've had the window open all day in mid-February. I mean, that's an amazing accomplishment to have. You know, you get to air out the apartment or house or what you may have. And it's all driven by this nice ridge that is in place, our southeast ridge, that is pumping air masses right from the Gulf of Mexico, right from the Gulf Coast, right into the northern mid-Atlantic. You can see all our polar and Arctic, well, really pretty much just polar air mass over the United States is focused over the Central Plains. And you can see the upper level winds here pretty much aligned here with this positively tilted trough. The reason why I'm pointing this out is that with our cold front that's going to be coming in on Friday, the orientation of this trough is going to slow down the surface cold front, and it's going to slow down the cold air transport. And the reason why that kind of stands out to me is that on Friday morning, with that orientation, and let me see if I can pull up the 850 millibar winds here. Okay, so during Friday morning, those winds are going to be running parallel to the surface cold front. And you're going to have winds anywhere between, say, about 35 to maybe pushing 60 knots. And my concern here is that we'll have enough speed shear to spin up some strong thunderstorms. I don't think severe thunderstorms. I don't think we have the instability for that. And I think that the support in terms of a jet dynamic is more focused further south towards Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, right where the core of this jet is. But where we are, it's aligned such that it will produce some lines of training showers and thunderstorms. And that's showing up pretty nicely with the support, let's see, at 500 millibars with the PVA, then 700 millibars and 850 millibars. and then you have your thermal gradient set up. That positively tilted trough means that you're going to have a slow-moving cold front with cells of thunderstorms within the rainfall ahead of the cold front, producing the potential for some heavier downpours. And that's starting to show up in the NAM model guidance with some of these cells. So it's going to be in the late morning hours, so a little bit after the morning rush hour. We're going to be dealing with this line of heavier downpours and a few embedded thunderstorms within it. Maybe a flash of lightning or two. But what I find interesting with this scenario setting up for Friday is that I don't think this is going to be the last time that we're going to see a nice line of thunderstorms marching through. Because in terms of tropical forcing, this year has featured a hybrid of La Nina and El Nino influences. I had talked about this on Fox 5. If you might have seen the discussion I had with Fox 5 this, I did it yesterday, but it showed this afternoon with Audrey, where we've had different characteristics of both La Nina and El Nino. And this El Nino characteristic that is showing up here, I think is going to be something that is going to be very much a constant theme with showers and thunderstorms, and some of these thunderstorm outbreaks being severe for us. And one thing that we're going to have to watch out for is the orientation of these troughs and the ability for slow-moving cold fronts producing areas of significant rainfall and flash flooding. So I think this is a theme for the spring that is going to start to show up more and more. And this is kind of the first hint of that. So it's just something that I kind of saw and I noticed, and I just wanted to point out that for Friday morning, late morning rush hour into the early afternoon, watch out for some of these stronger thunderstorms. Now, let's talk about the pattern overall. Now, we know that we have our major stratospheric warming event. I mean, the polar vortex just gets nuked here. I mean, it just completely gets torn apart. And I don't really see the polar vortex really consolidating all that much after this, okay? Because as this process is evolving, we're getting further and further into the spring season, and we're going to start to see the natural collapse of the polar vortex take place, and I don't think it's going to have much time to rebound. So you're going to have these polar air masses steadily moving through, and we'll talk about that aspect in just a moment. But I just wanted to show classic major stratospheric warming event happening here. It's textbook scenario. If you're wondering, okay, why isn't this creating the string of winter storms for us? It simply comes down to location. And location matters. This is the GFS ensemble guidance. I figure I'd show this rather than the European because some people say I use the European too much. Granted, I like using the best tool, but let's use the GFS ensemble guidance for now, just to kind of show this evolution at 50 millibars. And notice the focus and displacement of the polar vortex is off towards Asia. And so you probably heard me say this before. I want to say it again. This is why you're not going to end up with the blockbuster snow. I still see some meteorologists. I never pick on individuals who aren't meteorologists, who just haven't gone to college. They haven't had the training. They haven't had the ability to study all the physics involved in the equations and go through that process. They're enthusiasts. And personally, I think that's great. Okay? I get it. You know, before college, I used to try to find every possible way to see how it's going to snow. Maybe it's going to snow if it does this or that. And I don't want to ruin that, because that type of excitement and that type of wonder, it's a joy. You know, it's kind of like trying to kill someone's childhood, you know, or inner child, I guess. You know, not to get all zen and stuff, but I don't want to ruin that excitement. But at the same time, it's my responsibility to kind of be the one to say, okay, here's why this isn't going to work out. And so it kind of annoys me when I see other meteorologists that should know better um, trying to push this idea of, March is going to set up being cold and snowy and all that stuff. And I see it, I don't call it out per person, but I'm saying it here right now. This signal that we're looking at right here, let's go to 240 hours out. Okay, heck, let's do 120 hours out. This signal is not a snow and cold signal for us. It is a stormy signal. It is a volatile signal. It's one where we're going to see a lot of interaction between polar and Pacific air masses. But if you're looking for sustained Arctic air and polar air and the type of blocking to support waves of winter storms, you're on the wrong side of the hemisphere. You got to go down. You got to go towards Europe. You got to go towards Asia. And this is why. If this was flipped, believe me, I would be out there with trumpets saying, we're going to have snowstorm after snowstorm. It's going to be crazy. My wife is going to get annoyed because I'm never going to be sleeping because I'm going to be drinking tons of coffee, doing this live updates every week, 3 or 4 days out of the week. But that's not happening. I would love it to happen. It'd be great if it happened. For one, it'd mean that my winter forecast was actually correct, which it won't be. But that's not what you have here in any way, shape, or form. So where are we going with this? What are we looking at when we take a look at April, should I say, the rest of February and March? Well, let's take a look at the pattern evolution here on the European ensembles. And what does it really tell me? Well, for the past couple of days, there's been a lot of hint about winter storms, right? Around the 22nd and 24th. And for premium members, I've been kind of laying down the very preliminary idea of what could be possible. And the coastal plain I've kept pretty warm, pretty much rain, maybe see a little bit of snow, but no real accumulation. If you're looking for some sort of accumulating snowfall, I wasn't sure how much, but if you were looking for that, probably want to head up towards the Poconos, Catskills, that type of thing. But I made it very clear the reason why this pattern really doesn't scream winter storm to me is because it relies on a feature that shows up plenty 10 days out, but once you get closer to 7 days out and 5 days out, it disappears completely. And that's the 50-50 low. So what that is, let me get to about 10 days out here. Actually, this worked just fine right here. Okay. So what you're looking for when you're looking for a winter storm pattern, in this scenario especially, is you're looking for something that's going to crush this ridge. Because in the subtropical jet stream, the tropical forces like the MJO is going to support a trough somewhere around the desert southwest or around California, and that's going to shoot your short waves out here. Remember, part of the winter forecast was the idea that you get low pressure systems developing in the plains and shooting towards the east coast. Either they will track towards the Delmarva Peninsula or they'll track towards the eastern Great Lakes. And the difference between those two storm tracks was whether or not you'd get a sustained negative NAO. Well, part of a sustained negative NAO, and there's two types. There's the east base and the west base. You can tell which one's which by the east base allows your ridge to build into the eastern part of Greenland, but a lot of the displacement is more towards the Atlantic, and you get more below normal heights as you head out towards more like Ireland, okay? Or should I say Iceland? Sorry, Iceland. West base negative NAO has this ridge building through Greenland into northeastern Canada, a nice trough / upper level low around the Canadian Maritimes, and that forces your storm track to the south. I should note during El Nino years, this ridge is gone. You get a trough in the east, you get that block set up, and that's where you get your Miller A and Miller B storms redeveloping off the North Carolina coast. You get your phasing, get all sorts of fun. But we'll save that for next year. This year, we're dealing with the battle of this ridge and this feature, our tropospheric polar vortex, or at least part of it. Now remember, at this point, the polar vortex has been basically bashed with a hammer, and it's broken in different pieces. But at this point, the weaker piece is over North America, and the stronger pieces are over Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, parts of China. Okay? So that's where we're at right now. So with that being the case, in order to get a cold solution, you need this feature to drop down towards the Hudson Bay, which it does, and you need a strong upper level low sitting around the Canadian Maritimes. Now, when you take a look at the operational guidance, it tried to do that. In fact, the GFS tries to do that, but it fails. How do we know it fails? When we take a look at the heights, if the heights are deeper towards the Hudson Bay, then the support to suppress the storm track basically goes away. Now, the GFS doesn't support a somewhat 50-50 low until after our storm event for the 22nd through the 24th. So what is this feature right here on the GFS? This is our storm that moves through. So essentially what you have here is for the day of the storm event, your feature here, your shortwave here, is able to track towards the St. Lawrence River Valley. And again, this is on the GFS, the colder of the model guidance. Because this feature is dictating it and controlling it, this feature is too weak to block it. Okay? So it wraps around and it doesn't intensify until this is the actual storm that intensifies your block. And then as it intensifies, it rotates back towards the Canadian Maritimes and it heads back towards the core of the polar vortex, thus pulling all your polar and Arctic air northward. So, in this scenario, what you end up with is a pattern where you have a storm track either heading over the northern mid-Atlantic or to the northwest. For the most part, you're dealing with a warm front that lifts through the region with the low pressure system, primary low pressure system tracking towards, say, the Finger Lakes or to Syracuse, and then it redevelops towards the Gulf of Maine. This is definitely a snowy pattern for New England. So if you're heading up to the Green and White Mountains, this should be a nice little period of winter weather for you. But in the long term, once we get past this point, we get into early to mid-March. We have an MJO that's moving towards phase 7 and 8 during this time period. It's neutral, then phase 7 and 8. There's still a La Nina signal. And what this signal supports is polar and Arctic air masses diving into the Rockies and northern plains, somewhat polar air mass pushing into eastern Canada. We are basically caught in a gradient with a very tropical warm air mass to our south, and your storm track continues to march towards the northern mid-Atlantic and the eastern Great Lakes. And because this feature is stronger and these heights are far deeper, this feature out here is a minor feature, and therefore it doesn't allow for suppression of the storm track. So this is an active pattern heading into early to mid-March. It's a chilly pattern heading into early to mid-March, but it's not a snowy pattern in any way, shape, or form. So That's where we stand as we head into March. Now, the rest of the spring is going to be very interesting because we're going to be watching the evolution of our La Nina collapsing. And there is a lot of data, in fact, let me scroll up to it. Here we are, supporting a transition as we move towards spring and towards summer from a La Nina to an El Nino. And considering this La Nina has been rather unusual, it's going to be interesting to see, based on what impacts we've had with the volcano from last January, of how this El Nino develops and how the upper level winds evolve. My theory right now, I would not be surprised with this El Nino developing that we get a very active, very robust subtropical jet stream. It's going to shear apart any tropical systems that develop next summer. But I also think it's going to create some dynamic severe thunderstorm events. From the plains to the Tennessee River Valley, possibly the northern mid-Atlantic. This is going to be a very interesting year to see how tropical moisture is going to interact with the polar jet stream and how that evolution is going to influence the MJO circulation and the overall evolution of polar air masses interacting over the northern mid-Atlantic. It's going to be very interesting. I'm not sure where that's going to go, but I think we're going to learn a lot about how that water vapor that is still trapped in the stratosphere is going to really alter the QBO, the stratospheric winds, and that will help to enhance our El Nino. Very interesting stuff. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but definitely some interesting evolutions in the weather pattern that we're going to be learning a lot. So now with that, I am going to answer all your questions. We're going to start off with the live chat, and then we're going to go to YouTube, which a couple of interesting questions in there as well. But first, let's see here. I'll roll up here. Let's see. Good evening, everyone. Ned Stark lied. Winter was not coming. Yeah, that's true. Let's see here. Massive warm pool of air at 10 millibars covers the entire polar regions plus Central Asia. Unfortunately, the vortex at that level is centered over Scandinavia and 70 millibars this week, but over Asia and Europe. That's exactly the problem. In fact, let's take a look at that. Let's go 70 millibars. We'll zoom out. There is your problem. There is your problem for the rest of the winter right there, that orientation. Thus, right idea, wrong location, pretty much. Very clear from looking at 250 millibars that the wavelengths and locations are just a bit off for snow for us. Ridge under the Aleutians, yes. Western ridge, but too narrow and tilted. Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what we're seeing evolve here. Everything is off by just a little bit, and that's what's limiting our potential here. Any threat of flooding, flash flooding, urban flooding, and or wind damage on Friday? I'm more concerned about urban flooding than anything else. I think that as far as rivers and whatnot, I think we'll be fine, but definitely keep an eye out for some urban flooding potential. Speaking of near misses, lots of CMEs that have just missed. Yeah, the sun has been incredibly active. Let's take a look at that. Plenty of sunspots just firing off here. The sun is just, well, we don't have to worry about any blank days, at least for a while, and we're definitely rapidly moving towards the peak of our solar cycle. It has been more impressive than anything that's been forecasted. It tells you how much we really understand the sun. And a lot of interesting features are showing up in the sun that in some cases we were not expecting. Solar scientists were not expecting. We do have a geomagnetic watch, storm watch, a minor G1 class geometric storm. It's possible around February 15th. So let's see, that's about now. So that would explain why everything's been kind of loopy a little bit with your phones and whatnot. Let's see here. My guess is that we'll see a very nice west base negative NAO in July, because that seems how things work out. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me the way things have been evolving. Any prospect that in the summer and next winter, that even if we have a weak El Nino, it keeps some La Nina characteristics, same way this year's La Nina had El Nino characteristics? That's a great question. Huh. You know, I don't know about the Southeast Ridge aspect of it, but let's say we get a weak El Nino, but your MJO is stuck in phase 2, 3, or should I say 3, 4, okay, or 3, 4, 5, then that would produce a influence of more Pacific air masses, which would feel more La Nina-like. And that could support more of a trough over the southwest, which would lead to a ridge in the east. So there's kind of like your La Nina signal. Is there anything which would change the orientation of the polar vortex, high latitude block, or intensity? Or is there nothing that looks like to cause that? It's a little too late for that now. I'd say if it was December, you'd have a shot, like it redevelops, and then you get another disruption event that could knock the polar vortex back over towards our neck of the woods. But there just isn't enough time. It's February 15th, and we just don't have the time to consolidate it, disrupt it, and send it back over towards us before you start dealing with some serious sun angle issues and rapidly modifying polar air masses. So really, it's a time constraint issue at this point. Let's take a look at the YouTube chat. Let's see here. Cape May, New Jersey made it to 61 today. That's true. Can you share what your favorite winter storm was to track and go into a little detail about it? Okay, so my favorite winter storm, God, there's so many. But I think my favorite professional one was the Boxer Day blizzard. And the reason why that one was so much fun was that the model guidance was really poor, and you had to use observational data to really pick up the potential for this storm. So I distinctly remember this. I was just starting out with the company, and just starting to build the website and everything, and really kind of build a name for myself. And I remember looking at the water vapor satellite picture, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying, something is not right here. Something's not right with the evolution of this storm. And of course, families like, Stephen, what are you talking about? There's no winter storm warnings. There's nothing going on. Go and enjoy Christmas Eve. Leave us alone. So I remember telling everyone, like, I don't have great confidence in this, but I think this winter storm is something that is really going to impact a lot of New Jersey and New York City Metro. It's going to cause a lot of problems. And at first, there were quite a few people who were like thinking I was just kind of hype casting. Then I remember the first winter storm watch that came out with that. And I remember my parents looking at me saying, "You've got to be kidding me." And I just said, "I told you so." And it just kind of really put my name out there in the industry. And beforehand, you went to forums. I was working for another company, starting out, so you got that. Of course, everyone knew me in my hometown, but it just kind of really put my name out there, and it got me a lot of coverage, like in the news media and whatnot. Like, who in the heck is this guy, you know? And it really kind of helped solidify what I do. So that storm is always going to stand out to me as one that I love forecasting, and it was an interesting storm because it was very compact, it was very tight, it had impressive mesoscale banding involved with it, and it pummeled Monmouth County, which I personally enjoyed quite a bit because I'm living there. So, and plus it was right around Christmas, so it's kind of like you kind of had that Christmas feel, and you're just this close away from a white Christmas. It's the closest thing I had to a real white Christmas ever. And it was a fun storm to forecast for. It was a lot of fun, and that one I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. Of course, there's other winter storms that you started when you were a kid. It gets you involved in meteorology, but that one will always stand out to me. And then in terms of winter season, the winter of 95-96. I loved because there was one storm after the other. I was probably the most popular kid in my school because I was really involved with the weather, and I was telling my teachers, don't bother doing the test because we're going to be home because we're going to have snow days. And obviously I was very popular for a very short period of time because I was right. And that was a lot of fun as well. Let's see here. Steve, will the line of heavy downpours make it to the coast on Friday morning? I think that the heavy downpours will. I think the thunderstorms are going to be focused more towards the Delaware River Valley. And then as they march through Monmouth and Ocean County and head towards the coast, they'll steadily weaken because the thermal gradient and the instability involved driving those thunderstorms will be weakening as well. Let's see here. Let's see. Jonathan Cohen asks, I was interested in something you mentioned last week. With urban heat island effect causing more convection and tighter snow gradients, I recall at least 2 storms a couple of winters ago where northern Philadelphia suburbs had close to a foot, while Center City had about an inch of slush. My question is, how do you forecast for this scenario? Oh, Jonathan, that's a wonderful question. And when I figure it out, I'll let you know. That is one of the most difficult aspects of a winter storm. Because here's the thing. You can pinpoint where the gradients are going to have the best potential to form, right? So usually you want to look northwest of the 700 millibar low, and you want to look for the 850 millibar isotherm around -6, between -6 and -8, because that's typically where you're going to have your best mesoscale banding, right? And you also want to look for a tight gradient signal, either at 925 millibars or 850 millibars. So you do all that. Then you try to factor in the urban heat island effect. Now, the problem with what you're talking about here is that the gradient gets so strong that you have all this rising air, right? Well, as we know with the laws of physics, what goes up must come down. And when that air sinks, as it did right over Philadelphia, it also warms. So if you have, let's say you have that tight gradient and your 850 millibar temperatures over Philadelphia without that process is around -2 degrees Celsius. Well, that rapidly sinking air for a short period of time warms up those 850 and 925 millibar temperatures to right around 1 degree Celsius or 0 degrees Celsius, which introduces mixing and slush, a mess. And if that gradient lasts long enough, you can have pockets, and we've seen this within winter storms, where everyone has snow, right? And then you get this intense gradient to your northwest, and all of a sudden, people to the southeast of that snow band are reporting sleet and rain mixing in with the snow. Well, that's the sinking warm air associated with the circulation. So you have all this rising air that's occurring with this intense band, and then the sinking air to the south and east of it that is warming the atmosphere just enough to support that mixing. So how do you forecast for it? You really have to nowcast it, so to speak. You have to see that gradient starting to develop and then make your adjustments while the storm is evolving. Now, granted, being able to forecast a gradient like that is nearly impossible. And if you could pull it off 6, 12, 24 hours out ahead of the event happening, most likely I would not be doing this live chat. I'd probably be locked up in some government facility. Because what you're doing is figuring out chaos and figuring out a chaotic atmospheric environment that not even your best computers, even the artificial intelligent ones, can figure out very easily. Once the process starts and you recognize what that process is, then you can make your adjustments. So once you know where that band is starting to set up and it's fitting within the parameters that you saw in the synoptic guidance, once you see that, then you can start making your adjustments. And then you can say, okay, we're going to knock down the snowfall amounts in Philadelphia, and we're going to increase them to the north and west of Philadelphia. And north and west of Philadelphia is going to end up with 12 inches, and Philadelphia itself, I feel like I'm picking on Philadelphia, get about maybe an inch or so out of it. And that's something, much like forecasting for a thunderstorm. You know severe thunderstorms are coming. You know that where the best potential is for that development, but you still need to watch the evolution of that thunderstorm complex to pick out where the tornadoes are going to form and which thunderstorms intensifying and which ones weakening. So you can't do it. You can't really forecast. You can't do a pinpoint forecast on that until you're actually within the storm and you start looking for some of those factors. Let's see here. Card's asking, what do you anticipate as far as general hurricane formation areas tracks if we do get a weak El Nino this summer? I really can't go into specifics just yet, but typically, weak El Ninos usually limit the development of storms around, let's say, the Gulf of Mexico, and around the Bahamas. You still have the potential for your long track hurricanes, but there's going to be a lot of vertical wind shear involved, so it's going to limit your development of tropical development throughout the year, in theory. Union County got hit good with the Boxer Day blizzard. Yep. Do mesoscale models take into account urban heat island effect? They're starting to. Especially the HRR has gotten better, and the updated NAM is getting better and picking that up. But it's not as good as some of the newer model guidance that's coming out. But there's definitely an attempt to try to improve that. I think the HRR does a better job because it's constantly updating. So every time you funnel in those observations and you get that natural warming showing up around Manhattan, around Newark, and it really does a great job with like summer heat, where it picks up that heat index and it picks up that temperature regime. So the models are definitely improving in that, and it's improving because there's better research. So I think that with that, we'll start to get better guidance in terms of forecasting for those mesoscale events. A lot of great questions here tonight, guys. Outstanding job. So, I know that you guys don't want to hear this, but we're just going to kind of walk through this upcoming week and just kind of get a better idea. Again, looks like we're going to be in the 60s for tomorrow and for Friday, so certainly enjoy that. Yes, we'll be dealing with some showers and thunderstorms, but Friday afternoon, once the cold front clears out, looks like it's going to be pretty nice out. So definitely get out and enjoy that. Saturday is going to be pretty chilly. Sunday is going to be pretty seasonable. President's Day is going to be relatively quiet. I think that any shower potential is going to be pretty much isolated, maybe 1/100 of an inch of rainfall. Then we get to our next storm threat. And again, because of what I'm seeing here with the pattern, I'm probably, depending on what I'm seeing in 0Z, I'll probably cut down the frozen potential even for the interior based on what I see with the ensemble guidance. I'm leaning a little bit more heavily on the ensemble guidance and the operational guidance for the time period of the 22nd through the 24th. But, well, the trend is not your friend. I'll put it that way. If you're looking for that snowfall. And then we're going to continue on with an active pattern. I'm expecting to remain pretty busy when it comes to forecasting precipitation, just not a lot of frozen precipitation. This looks like a pattern where you have a storm approach, it warms up, you get rain, we get a cold blast for a day, and then we moderate until we get to well above normal. Another storm moves through, so on and so forth. And I think that we're going to be in that type of pattern through the middle of March. Well, at the very least, we'll have baseball games to start to talk about. And so, just so you guys know, as we get ready to move through into spring and summer, if you're wondering if this is the first time you're going to be following with us in the spring and summer, we will, of course, have plenty of discussions on thunderstorm potential, severe weather. We'll go over the latest research that's popping out there, maybe learn a little bit more about some of the new energy features that are coming out there with fusion energy and solar and whatnot. Have some personal things that we're going to be sharing as well over the next couple of weeks. We'll get to that. You might notice some boxes behind me. Don't worry. Things are getting interesting. But we won't say much more beyond that. And of course, we'll be taking your questions. And if you have questions about research and whatnot, leave it in the chat and we'll take a look and talk about it next week. If there's something in particular you would like to dive more into. If you're interested in meteorology, as a career, if you have any questions about that, we'll definitely start to cover that. So that pretty much covers everything I have for this week. I think we answered all of the questions, outstanding questions at that. And yeah, okay. So we'll call it a night, call it a week, and let's see here. And I'll see you next week. And as always, stay safe out there.